Well, that didn't go as planned. Lewis Hamilton's dream Ferrari debut? More like a nightmare dressed in red. From battling Alex Albon like it was for a championship, to watching Oscar Piastri zoom past him on the final corner, it was a disaster, to say the least. Hamilton expected fireworks in his first race, in red. Instead, he barely got a spark. Ferrari fans were hoping for a dominant display, but what they got was a P10 finish, questionable strategy calls, and a frustrated seven-time world champion already raising concerns about his new team. But what went so wrong? And why is Hamilton already frustrated with Ferrari? Let's be honest. When Hamilton's Ferrari move was announced, it felt like the start of a legendary new chapter. A seven-time world champion in the iconic red, ready to take the fight to Red Bull and finally bring Ferrari back to glory. Fans envisioned a fairy tale debut. Maybe not a dominant victory, but at least a strong podium finish. After all, this was Lewis Hamilton. Surely, he would find a way to make magic happen. Instead, P10. One single point. The excitement quickly turned to confusion as Hamilton found himself stuck in midfield battles, fighting tooth and nail just to scrape into the top 10. And the worst part? It wasn't a case of bad luck. Ferrari genuinely didn't have the pace. Hamilton later admitted the race went a lot worse than expected, and you could tell. The SF25 was unpredictable in the rain, twitchy through corners, and struggled for grip. Even when Hamilton made a bold call to stay on slicks as rain started falling, a safety car ruined any advantage he might have gained. Ferrari's strategy? Questionable. To make matters worse, overtaking was a nightmare. Hamilton spent laps trying to get past Alex Albon, and was even stuck behind the Racing Bulls at one point. This wasn't the Hamilton-Ferrari domination fans had imagined. It was survival mode. A reality check, not just for Lewis, but for anyone who thought Ferrari was ready to fight at the front. If you thought Lewis Hamilton was about to enter his Ferrari honeymoon phase, think again. The way things unfolded in Australia, this marriage looked more like a messy reality TV show than a smooth love story. Over the radio, Hamilton sounded less like a happy newlywed and more like someone realizing they married into chaos. And let's be real, Ferrari's strategy calls were nothing short of bizarre. If every other team was playing chess, Ferrari was playing checkers, with half the pieces missing. They've had some legendary blunders in the past, but this race was another entry into their Hall of Fame. Hamilton's new race engineer, Riccardo Adami, had big shoes to fill after Lewis's long partnership with Bono at Mercedes, but their first big test together? A disaster. The pit wall and the driver just weren't on the same page. Hamilton had a moment of genius, or at least that's what it seemed like at first. As light rain started falling, he stayed out on slicks, while everyone else scrambled for intermediates. It was a gamble, but if the track dried up quickly, he could have gained a massive advantage. And for a moment, it actually worked. Hamilton inherited the race lead, while the rest of the grid struggled with changing conditions. It was a glimpse of vintage Hamilton, a master of reading tricky conditions. But then, Ferrari happened. A sudden safety car deployment turned Hamilton's gamble into a nightmare. Instead of taking advantage of the caution period, Ferrari double-stacked their pit stops, first pitting Charles Leclerc and then bringing in Hamilton right after. This was where things went completely off the rails. By the time Hamilton rejoined, whatever advantage he had gained was wiped out, and he was back in the midfield, fighting cars he had no business racing against. You could hear the frustration in his voice over the radio. Guys, what are we doing? Hamilton knew it, Ferrari knew it, and everyone watching knew it. This wasn't just bad luck. It was another classic Ferrari strategy blunder. And for Hamilton, it was a brutal wake-up call. Just when Hamilton thought his Ferrari debut couldn't get any worse, Oscar Piastri, yes, a McLaren, delivered the final blow. On the very last lap, in the very last corner, Piastri pulled off a clean, ruthless overtake, snatching P9 right out of Hamilton's hands. For a seven-time world champion, this wasn't just an embarrassing moment, it was a humbling one. Piastri, still relatively new to F1, had just outmaneuvered one of the sport's greatest drivers, and in a McLaren that, on paper, shouldn't have been fighting Ferrari on race pace. Hamilton might have been struggling all race, but this was the cherry on top of a disastrous debut. But here's the real issue. It wasn't just about losing 9 pesos. This was a wake-up call. Piastri's move wasn't just a great overtake. It exposed Ferrari's ongoing weaknesses. The SF25 lacked grip, struggled in changing conditions, and wasn't quick enough in race trim. Even with Hamilton's legendary racecraft, there was only so much he could do. If Ferrari expected Hamilton to magically fix their problems, this race proved otherwise. They weren't just behind Red Bull or McLaren, they were getting beaten by Mercedes too. And if this trend continues, Ferrari might be in for a very long season. For Hamilton, the nightmare wasn't just losing a position. It was realizing Ferrari might not be ready to win anything at all. Apparently, even Ferrari's boss, Fred Vasseur, wasn't thrilled with how things went down. And honestly, who can blame him? Reports suggest he was already annoyed during qualifying, where a controversial radio message nearly got Hamilton eliminated in Q1. That was the first red flag. Now, after a strategy disaster and a 10-peso finish, you can bet Vasseur isn't smiling behind the scenes. Ferrari had high hopes coming into this season, especially with a driver like Hamilton in the mix. But instead of fighting for podiums, they're explaining why a 7-time world champion couldn't get past a Williams. And if Vasseur is stressed now, imagine how he'll feel if Ferrari keeps fumbling their race strategy. The Italian team already has a reputation for questionable calls, but when a driver like Hamilton is left shaking his head after one race, that's a serious problem. One race in, and it's already clear that communication between Hamilton and Ferrari is a work in progress. At Mercedes, his partnership with Bono was legendary. They spoke the same language, and Bono always had the right words to keep Hamilton focused. With Riccardo Adami, things are different. The radio exchanges in Australia weren't exactly smooth, and Ferrari's decision-making only added to the confusion. If Ferrari keeps making calls like these, we might see Hamilton reinvent his famous Bono, "My tires are gone" radio moments, except this time, it'll be, "Adami, what on earth are we doing?" And at this rate, it won't be the last time we hear it. Lewis didn't sugarcoat it. "A lot worse than I thought it would go." That's not the kind of review you want after your first big race with a new team. It wasn't just a bad day, it was a complete reality check. The Ferrari wasn't as fast as expected, the strategy calls were messy, and even Hamilton's best efforts couldn't save the weekend. So, should we hit the panic button? Not yet. Ferrari still has time to turn things around. It's only the first race, and teams often learn from their mistakes. But let's be real, if they don't improve quickly, this could go down as one of the most painful career moves in F1 history. Hamilton joined Ferrari to chase an 8th world title, not to fight for P10. If this trend continues, he might start wondering if he made a huge mistake. So, what do you think? Did Hamilton make the right move by joining Ferrari, or is this the beginning of another Maranello disaster? Should we give Ferrari time to sort things out, or is this already looking like a mistake? With McLaren still dominant and Red Bull catching up, Ferrari can't afford to keep making strategic blunders. Can they turn things around, or will Hamilton find himself stuck in midfield battles all season? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you still believe in Ferrari, or is this looking like a risky gamble gone wrong? If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to stay updated on all the latest F1 drama, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.